We are in a golden age of television. More and more it seems like the place to tell long-form, character-driven stories is the small screen, despite that historically not being the case. Consider the likes of Daredevil, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, the list goes on. But among this crowd of titans stands one black sheep. While many of us come from a background of anime, it has to be admitted that animation is not considered the pinnacle of storytelling for the mainstream Western audience. Despite that, one show has risen above the pool to go toe-to-toe with the best of them. A show accepted by an audience of all ages and all demographics. That show being Avatar: The Last Airbender. Having made a handful of videos about the show at this point, my thoughts on characters like Zuko and Katara are abundantly clear. Characters from Avatar impress with their incredibly well-written arcs that stand out as some of the best in the modern landscape. But surprisingly, throughout all 5 or so of my videos, there has been one character I've yet to mention, and not for a lack of popularity, as she is a fan favorite. Of course, I am speaking of the blind bandit herself, Toph Beifong. Toph is an interesting character because she is largely unchanging. As to where a character like Zuko is all about the growth of antagonist to ally, Toph enters and leaves our mind as the same person. Despite that, you'll often see her talked about in the same vein as these other characters with intricately woven backstories and journeys. How does Toph manage to grab the eyes of viewers without offering the intense complexity shared by her castmates?
The voice in Tony's head was originally a different actress, but again, the Girl Friday thing was something that I like very much, but when she came on as American, the only way to establish who she was as sort of different person was to have banter between them, which was literally meant like establishing an entirely new character after the vision. So to give her the accent sort of made a little piece of shorthand.
This is Joss Whedon on his director's commentary for 2015's Age of Ultron. He's referring to the replacement AI system used by Tony Stark after Jarvis comes to life in the form of Vision. Age of Ultron balances a lot of new characters with Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and of course Ultron and Vision. In this time crunch, there really wasn't a lot of room for introducing someone as minor as Tony's new AI, but Joss recognized that he still had to make her distinct. Distinct enough that she could stand out despite not receiving a formal introduction. The solution was simple: make it a girl's voice, opposite to previous Jarvis, and give her an Irish accent, one not yet heard in the MCU. This is the essence of design, and though this is but one infinitesimally small piece of that movie, it serves as an example of how simple details can create impactful impressions. The first element that Aang learns in Avatar: The Last Airbender outside of airbending was water, partially taught to him by Katara, but significantly through Pakku of the Northern Water Tribe. Pakku was an old man, old and powerful, something he shared in common with the first major earthbender introduced in the series, King Bumi, and the first potential firebending teacher, Zhang Zhang. This gives the subconscious idea that the people who will be behind Aang's teachings will be powerful, but old and wise. This is the first detail in subverting expectations that goes into Toph's distinct introduction. To contrast with the likes of Pakku, Bumi, and Zhang Zhang, we are instead introduced to a little girl. Or sort of introduced, because the second detail is actually that she appears as a hallucination of sorts in the episode The Swamp. There's a couple notable elements to this introduction. The first, that we will get back to later, is the clothing that she wears. It's a fancy garment of sorts, something a proper royal lady would wear. The second is actually through Katara and Sokka's hallucinations. The party is split up, each having their own brief moment with seeing something that isn't actually there. For Katara, this was her mother. For Sokka, this was Yue. Both figures of their past, some more recent than others, that left prematurely and created holes in the hearts of those still here. The swamp was showing people what they desired the most, people they missed. But for Aang, all he saw was a random little girl, not someone he had knowingly met before or had any sort of connection to. This creates a powerful link between us and whoever this girl ends up being. It tells us that she will be as important as Princess Yue or as emotionally vital as Katara's mom. And the third minor detail, serving as a bit of foreshadowing, is the fact that when Aang eventually does catch his hallucination, he grabs her only to accidentally grab Katara. Again, this is minor, but it does foreshadow the idea that this girl has some sort of link to our resident waterbender. Not in the historical sense, but in the narrative one. Taken at face value, it could mean a couple things, like potentially a replacement romantic interest, but in hindsight we know it to actually mean that this girl will join the party and that she will serve as Aang's instructor, similar to Katara. Let's wrap back to detail number 1, the clothing. This is a bit of a double fake. First, we get the subconscious establishing of us looking for someone like Pakku or Bumi. Fake out number 1 is that it's not an old man, but a little girl in a royal dress. Fake out number 2 is that this girl in a royal dress is actually a girl in a wrestling outfit who is a champion of an underground earthbending ring. Notice how when we first see her like this, we hold the frame close, both highlighting her blind eyes and masking her stature, only to quickly pull out to a wide shot and having her stand next to 2 average-sized people, thus emphasizing how small she is. The context to her premiere fight is that she is defending her title against an undefeated contender in The Boulder, a muscled-up meathead. It's a short match as she unveils an ability that we have yet to see in the show, Earthbending Seismic Sense, and uses it to swiftly and surgically destroy her opponent. From this introduction, we've created multiple levels of intrigue. At any point in which you think you know who this earthbending teacher will be, your expectations are subverted. She's then given various attributes that lead her to being a person of interest, such as her having a last name, something no one else in the show seems to possess, or her incredible feats of power, or, the fact that she's blind. Toph is a standout character from her very introduction, and this lends incredible weight to her lasting power in terms of entertainment. She is able to remain relatively unchanging in comparison to other characters, largely due to this fact. In an article for The Writer magazine, writer Jeff Lyons states that not every story is actually a story. Instead, there are 2 subsections of fiction, story and situations. The difference lies in 4 conditions that he outlines in the article, but I'll be focusing on only one for the purposes of this video. Quote, "A situation begins and ends in the same emotional space that it started in. In other words, if you do not have an arc, you do not have a story." Now, that sounds derogatory, but it's actually not. For Lyons, he identifies the purpose of a story as to speak about growth and change. It is about the human condition and people learning. These things are inherent to character arcs, but as with all rules of writing, you are allowed to forego them. Some of the greatest pieces of fiction have. Indiana Jones famously is a character with no notable arc, but yet remains as one of the most iconic characters of all time with some of the most well-received movies. Katara and Zuko are stories in themselves. They are tales of people growing. Katara from a naive child to one of the most powerful waterbenders in the world. Zuko from a prince desperate for his father's approval to teacher of the Avatar. But Toph is not a story like that. She goes through little to no arc, having entered the show as a rambunctious rebel and leaving the show exactly the same. And she's all the more entertaining for it. However, that's not to say that there is no depth to her character at all. While Toph doesn't grow all that much as a person, we do manage to chip away at that rock-like exterior that she fronts in her daily life. At face value in her introduction, you may be led to believe that Toph has issues with authority, or more specifically, she hates being coddled. This is in part due to her royal upbringing in which she was seen as a helpless child, one to be protected at all costs, even at the expense of undermining her agency as an individual. But it's in that last line that we uncover the truth of the matter. Earlier I had alluded to a connection to be made between Toph and Katara. These 2 characters had a rocky relationship from nearly the get-go, and perhaps it's easy to see why. Katara joined Aang on his journey under the motivation of helping him master the elements, but a subsect of that motivation was that Katara herself could teach Aang to waterbend. She knew she wasn't a master, but figured a couple basic tricks could be easy enough. However, in the end, Aang still needed to get a real master, and thus Pakku entered the picture. Katara had issues with Pakku, but they mostly stemmed from outright sexism as opposed to any innate character flaws within herself. Of course, that character flaw being Katara's tendency to overstate her maturity as an adult. Even Katara could probably see that she was not in a position of superiority over someone as old as Pakku, despite exercising that authority over the likes of her friends. Fast forward to season 2. If Aang had studied under Bumi, I don't see any reason for Katara to come into conflict with him. But Aang didn't study under Bumi. He found teaching from a girl even younger than Katara. This stoked flames as it immediately played Katara's insecurities. Aang learning earthbending from a master who was 2 years younger than Katara undermines just how mature Katara is. By comparison, it makes her look weak or perhaps lesser than Toph. This in hand put Katara into motherly overdrive. In an attempt to regain authority, she had to once again overstate her role as the caretaker of the group. This inherently comes into conflict with what we know of Toph's flaw, which is that she hates being taken care of. These 2 are a perfect set of foils for each other. We see the culmination of this conflict come to head in one of my favorite episodes, The Runaway. In the beginning of this episode, Katara makes a bold claim that Toph actually misses her parents and that the hatred she puts on display is just a part of her front. Of course, Toph denies this, but there may be more truth to the statement than granted. What we learn about Toph this episode is that she has no actual issues with being taken care of. The real issue lies within needing to pretend to be someone she isn't. With her parents, Toph had to hide her incredible earthbending talents. She had to spend years working with an instructor who refused to go beyond the very basics of the skill, all because her father feared for her safety. She had to pretend to be a helpless helpless, blind little girl, when in actuality she was fully capable of looking after herself. After her whole childhood being spent like this, the idea of a parental figure was inherently linked to the idea of needing to hide who she really was. So when Katara's motherly tendencies come in the form of telling her she can't go run her scams, of course this would lead to intense conflict. It was the very type of conflict that led Toph to running away in the first place. This is not the only episode in which we learn the depths behind Toph's character, but it is probably the most impactful one. In a sense, you could maybe even call this an arc. While Toph doesn't necessarily go from something as extreme as disliking authority to liking authority, she does learn to trust in her companions and open up to her emotions. In the grand scheme of Avatar: The Last Airbender, in which we witness large-scale, grand character arcs, this at the very most comes across as a minor one. The truth of the matter is that Toph is a fantastic, entertaining character who manages to stand out as the rock of the group, the unbudging weight that solidifies herself as a fan favorite not through complexing, sweeping narratives, but through a unique, refreshing set of character traits. Thanks for watching. I swear there will be another anime video soon, maybe not right away, but I am working on it. If you enjoyed this video and like when I talk about Avatar, then please share it with your friends or anyone who you think might enjoy it, and if you really want to support us, you could do so at patreon.com/KatoYT. Join the likes of Wadzane Mufunde, Paige Mulder, the Hunter x Hunter 2011 Dick Riding Association, Danny DeDonkey, Gage Lambert, Doji, Tempest Nixt, Spencer, I Roulette Games, and H2Mass.